Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here, and I'd like to thank the curator, Margaret Parsons, head of the film department at the National Gallery of Art, for inviting me. I would also like to thank the family of Rajiv Vajja for making this annual lecture possible. Some of you may already know about the UCLA graduate students who have become known as filmmakers of the LA Rebellion during the late 1960s and mid-1980s. The late South African scholar and professor of literature and cinema studies, Ntangile Masalela, wrote about the Black students at UCLA, and he called us the Los Angeles School. Yet it was Professor Clyde Taylor who gave a speech at the Whitney Museum in the 1980s that served to brand the Black UCLA cinema students as a movement. The LA Rebellion is that movement. Almost 50 years later, a seminal text edited by Allison Nadia Field, Jan Christopher Horak, and Jacqueline Stewart was published, and it's called The LA Rebellion, Creating a New Black Cinema. They write about the revolutionary act of humanizing Black people on the screen. And they write, I quote, "Emancipating the image. This first group of film school trained Black filmmakers shared a desire to create an alternative cinema in narrative style and practice to the dominant American mode of cinema, an unwelcoming and virtually impenetrable space for minority filmmakers that routinely displayed insensitivity, ignorance, and deformation in its on-screen depiction of people of color." I entered UCLA in 1976 after completing my BA in film television production at the City College of New York, and after 2 years as a conservatory fellow at the American Film Institute. At UCLA, although I did not know it at the time, I became a member of the LA Rebellion and its legacy. So my talk today, the LA Rebellion, Architects of the Impossible, is my personal tribute to this particular cinema movement with a nod of appreciation to the literary scholar and cultural historian Saida Hartman, who coined the phrase architects of the impossible in reference to Black artists, visionaries, and their work. So where did I come from? When did I arrive at UCLA to become involved with the LA Rebellion? And what of my journey? Before I became a producer, writer, director, before I produced my first feature film and had the opportunity to work with HBO, Starz, OWN TV, Lionsgate Film, and television networks like CBS, before all of that, I was born to Charles Edward and Rudine Dash in the 1950s in New York City. I grew up there with my sister Charlene in public housing, the Queensbridge Housing Projects in Long Island City. We live just under the 59th Street Bridge. In the 1950s and 60s, Long Island City was not a haven for artists like it is today. It was more like a factory town. And I grew up in those crosswinds. When the wind blew from the left, we smelled fresh bread baking from the Silver Cup Bakery, a large industrial complex that is now a motion picture studio. When the wind blew from the right, the sweet smell of candy from Loft's Candy Factory, now self-storage facility. But when we heard tugboats, the air horns of tugboats, and the wind blew in from the foul-smelling East River facing our building, it was time to go inside to our third-floor apartment. We lived on Vernon Boulevard. And it was not so much as what was on the East River as much as what was inside the water of the East River, which had become so polluted. So when I say that I grew up in the crosswinds, It's also my way of referencing the turbulent political times and the racial confrontations that took place during the 1960s. Back then, there was a real racial reckoning, as it continues today. 5 decades after the 1963 March on Washington, the message that Black Lives Matter remains unresolved. We are not only in the throes of a viral pandemic, we, as African Americans and people of color, are also facing increased police brutality. This is not new. The only thing that is new that now, increasingly with those incontrovertible acts of violence, we are starting to record what we see. Things are being captured on cell phones. There are cell phone videos, and the year 2020 has become a year of yet another racial reckoning. And our recent election proves that things are still just as tense. In 1968, a few months after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., there were protests and riots, and my sister Charlene suddenly became a high fashion model. There was a racial reckoning back then too, and also a demand for diversity and a call for inclusion. So my sister was signed into the Ford modeling agency simply based upon her high school graduation photo. She immediately began working for Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and by 1969, she had even booked the cover of Look magazine. Years later, she was one of the American models known to have wowed the French fashion world at the Battle of Versailles in 1973. And I mention my sister because it was my sister Charlene who took me to see my first foreign film. My first foreign film was directed by Claude Lelouch, A Man and a Woman. It was a French film with English subtitles. I was resistant to the experience due to the subtitles. Around the same time, my family moved uptown to Harlem, where I began attending an after-school program at the Studio Museum of Harlem. It was created by a diverse group of artists, activists, philanthropists, and Harlem residents who put their heads together to create this art residence, which had workshops, and it was located on 125th Street and 5th Avenue at the time. It shared a loft space and a common wall, which was very important, with Barbara Ann Teer's National Black Theater. So my best friend from Queensbridge and we began attending what we thought was a still photography workshop at the Studio Museum of Harlem. 2 weeks into classes, we began to understand it was a motion picture workshop. We were disappointed, but we decided to stay anyway. Ed Spriggs was the director of the museum, and our film instructor was Randy Abbott, who later became Omar Mubarak. At the Studio Museum of Harlem, we began viewing foreign films. We were viewing films like Francois Truffaut's Jules and Jim, Sajiad Ray's Apu trilogy. And all of these foreign films were in black and white, and again with the subtitles. Our initial protests about having to read English subtitles on films being screened gave way, eventually, to a profound understanding of how our minds were totally capable of doing both at the very same time. It was when I began to understand the power and the meaning of the cinematic experience, the language of film, the experience of new worlds and cultural traditions. And we began having discussions about concepts of reality within the cinema frame as opposed to reality outside of the cinema frame. More importantly, I recognized the manifestation and the construction of dreams being projected onto the screen. Foreign film directors were sharing their imagination, sharing their daydreams as narratives to the world. And some of those narratives were as private and as sacred as religious confession. Early on, at home and in school, I had been labeled a daydreamer as I was growing up. So I learned to hide my acts of staring off into space just to wonder as my mind wandered. But at the Studio Museum of Harlem, viewing foreign films became an engine that sparked my imagination and fueled my daydreams. It also fueled my desire to seek more information about reality within the cinematic frame. And due to the shared walls with the National Black Theater next door, something extraordinary evolved. We were watching Sergei Eisenstein's Russian film, The Battleship Potemkin. At the same time, we were listening to the rhythms of spoken word poetry, African drummers, meditative chanting, and a cappella voices lifted in song. The Studio Museum of Harlem was where I first laced up and loaded a 16mm upright Moviola editing machine. I was good at that. My work print never got jammed, or I never tore any of the sprockets. I was good at loading a reel-to-reel Nagra sound recorder as well, but maybe not so much with recording the sound. That would take more time. The Studio Museum of Harlem is where I first began to think about how a film was made and why. Because it was the first time I picked up a motion picture camera and looked through the viewfinder. It was a 16mm spring-driven Bolex camera with a lens turret for 3 C-mount lenses, which allowed me for the very first time to begin framing my world with a variety of focal lengths. Unlike many filmmakers, I did not come from the actors' theater or from the writer's room. I came to filmmaking from behind the ground glass of a motion picture camera's lens. It was a time that I began to reimagine the world that I wanted to see because I could reframe it. I remember that it was one of the first times that I finally felt comfortable because I could lose myself in the physical handling of the technology that was new to me. Inside the Studio Museum of Harlem, I did not have to hide the fact that I was a daydreamer. I had space there to consider and to create. At the Studio Museum of Harlem, I felt free enough to begin to transform my daydreams from my imagination to another platform. And that platform was celluloid film. I could literally create and work with alternate realities, worlds of my own design, by shooting and editing the small frames on a roll of 16mm Kodak film. And as we learned the art, science, and the craft of filmmaking, we listened to Barbara Ann Tier's National Black Theater through shared walls at the Studio Museum of Harlem. And it was like, the sound was like a musical score to our fledgling efforts. And those moments were magical, truly. I believed my daydreams, my ideas that I had been hiding and cloaking for years, would finally be able to rise to the surface. However, the problem was this. It was the tail end of the Black arts movement. And within the art community, hard lines had already been drawn in the sand regarding how Black artists should use their imagination. The central question regarding one's creative construction of art remained at the time, how does it free the people? To make a film, we had to pitch our ideas for the approval of the group within the cinematography workshop. Everyone pitched their stories, and everyone's ideas, as any creative ideas are fragile. We were pitching and seeking approval from the group at large. There were gender issues. I was one of 2 girls in the workshop. The other girl was my best friend from the Queensbridge housing projects, and we did not have a majority vote. Therefore, One of my early ideas that I had about wrapping a dancer inside a piece of mesh fabric and having her perform like she's coming out of a womb did not get off the ground until I was a film student many years later at UCLA. I was admitted to the Leonard David Center for the Performing Arts, the David Picker Film Institute, as a student at the City College of New York. My instructors came from screenwriting, documentary, and experimental filmmaking, and they included Dennis Donito, Mr. Shapiro, Doug Harris, and the incomparable Ted Spanier, who taught us how to paint our stories on clear film leader with colored Sharpies. While I was an undergraduate student in film at City College, there were two amazing work-study summer jobs in films that I just want to mention because to me, they were really amazing in my journey of discovery. The first one was with Chamba Productions. I worked with St. Clair Bourne downtown on 9th Avenue in the film building, and I was a production assistant. It was my first professional gig on a film with a film production company. I got to hold cue cards on a short being made for Sesame Street starring Godfrey Cambridge. It was about a fish and how to spell the word F-I-S-H, fish. And I had to go downtown to the Fulton Street Fish Market to buy a humongous fish. And it was during this same summer of working with St. Clair Bourne on Sesame Street that I met Kathleen Collins. She was a young black filmmaker who had studied in Paris. She had graduated from the Sorbonne and she spoke fluent French. She was editing for Chamba Productions. And she later went on to direct two feature films. One, The Cruz Brothers and Mrs. Malloy, and the second, Losing Ground. Kathleen Collins was always an inspiration to me. And over the years, she became a colleague and a very good friend. Second thing I did while I was at work study at City College was I worked for Mayor Lindsay's initiative called Movies in the Streets. And I had to hop into the back of a 20-foot truck to prove I could become their first female rear screen projectionist on a film truck that traveled around the 5 boroughs every night showing films in the summer. They were mostly old studio westerns, and it was the city's effort to help keep the hot summer nights cool. I loved it. I left CCNY with a degree in filmmaking and moved to Los Angeles to apply to the graduate film program at UCLA. However, I did not get all of my reference letters in on time, so I did not get into UCLA at the time, but I was accepted into the Conservatory Fellowship Program at the American Film Institute. My class began September 1974 at the Doheny Estates in Beverly Hills. I was a producer writing fellow at AFI, and it was where I learned the foundations of writing for film and television. More importantly, I began interacting with other students who came from every part of the world, reminding me of my love for foreign films. At AFI, we had many visiting instructors, including the Hungarian Academy Award-winning film director Jan Kadar. I believe he won an Academy Award for Shop on Main Street. We also had William Friedkin, who had just produced and directed The Exorcist. And he actually showed us outtakes of The Exorcist that were cut from the film. My favorite visiting professor was the Serbian-American master of the film montage, and his name was Slavko Vorkapic. And he was known many, many years ago for his montage sequences on David Copperfield, The Good Earth, Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington. Slavko Vorkapic was in his 90s at the time, and his voice was so low, he had to wear a lavalier microphone to be heard by our small class of 15, but his mind was remarkably clear. Vorkapic taught visual theory. He had many theories, But what always stuck with me was his insistence that every film we made had to transcend the previous one. It had to be better. There was no sidestepping, no excuses. He taught us that our films must be made to communicate to an audience with the sound turned off. Our audience had to be able to read our film productions visually, aesthetically, without the use of sound or music. The images that comprised our film narratives had to resonate with meaning. It had to resonate with visual metaphors. He was teaching us visual rhetoric. Now, this was very interesting at the time because at AFI, there was this heavy push towards television, the kind of television where you could walk in and out of a room and still keep up with the episode you were watching because the dialogue was repetitive. They would tell us, tell them once, tell them twice, then remind them once again. However, the Vorkapich lectures were about evoking visceral reactions from the cutting together of dynamic images, kinetic movements, and kinetic moments. The look, the feel, and the texture of the visual images displayed on television and the screen. The students loved Slavko Vorkapich, and for me, he was another piece of the important puzzle I was trying to put together about how to go about becoming a filmmaker. The first year I was in Los Angeles as a producing writing fellow at AFI, I was introduced to Larry Clark, Charles Burnett, Pamela Jones, Jamal Fanaka, and Haile Garima. I read about them when I was an undergraduate at CCNY. They were the black filmmakers at UCLA, and Larry Clark was just about to go into production on his feature film called Passing Through. Charles and Haile were finishing their thesis films. Charles's thesis film was Killer Sheep, and Haile's was Bush Mama. So they were the mothers and fathers of what we now call the LA Rebellion. And there were others who I would also come to know over the next few years, including Ofumilayo Makara, Alile Sharon Larkin, Bernard Nicholas, Barbara McCullough, Billy Woodbury, Monona Wali, and Ben Caldwell, Stormy Bright, Melvana Ballinger, Karen Guillot, Jacqueline Frazier, Robert Wheaton, Iverson White, and Zainabu Irene Davis. And while I did not know it at the time, I would eventually cast my first feature film with actors I met through that UCLA Film Collective. But I was still in AFI when I met those people. My second year at AFI, we were visited by cinema luminaries who included Steven Spielberg, William Friedkin, Robert Altman, and a great visit from Ingmar Bergman. During that second year, the poet and novelist Dr. Maya Angelou also arrived to participate in the newly established Women's Directing Program. I was able to work with Dr. Maya Angelou on her video project, and years later, I was honored to be co-signatory on her second entrance into the Directors Guild of America. And while I was not able to direct a film at AFI because I was a producing writing fellow, I was able to prepare. I wrote several film scripts, including the film that would eventually become my first feature film. At AFI, after a lengthy internship with the David Wolpers production of Roots, I graduated from AFI June 1976. A short drive from AFI up Sunset Boulevard led me back to UCLA, where I was already registered for the MFA program in film and television that would begin that coming September. The average time spent as a graduate film student at UCLA is 4 years inside one place, Melnitz Hall. At UCLA, everyone's first project was, at the time, a non-sync short film that had to be shot on Super 8 film stock. Even if you were a veteran filmmaker, your project one had to be shot in Super 8. I guess they wanted to see where you were coming from. So I was more than ready. I adapted a short story written by Alice Walker to make my first film, and it was called Diary of an African Nun. I reached out to Barbara O., who I'd met on the set of Larry Clark's film the previous summer. I reached out to Barbara O. to portray the stoic nun in my movie, Sister Gloria. When I met Barbara O., she was a camera assistant on Larry Clark's film, and she was also the heroine in two of Haile Garima's films, Bush Mama and Child of Resistance. So she was a camera assistant, but she was also an actor.
When I was younger, in a bright blue school uniform and bare feet, I came every day to the mission school. Good morning, I chanted to the people I met, but especially to the nuns and priests who taught at my school.
Diary of an African Nun tells the story of a proud young woman who lives in the African country of Uganda, a woman who has given up the right to bear children and the right to dance alongside her tribal community, a woman questioning her path in life because she's become a Catholic nun. Barbara O. has an incredible face, an incredible range as an actor, as a performer. And I remember once while we were shooting, and there was just the two of us, she would use her Sekonic light meter. That's what we used to it back then when we were shooting celluloid film. She would use her light meter to take a reading for the camera, and I'd set the camera to that light reading. And then she would lay back and shed a tear as Sister Gloria, with the light meter neatly hidden beneath her pillow. We laughed about that many years later, that she was running tech at the same time acting with a single tear coming out of her eye. Diary of an African Nun screened at the Los Angeles Film Exposition, which was called Filmmakers at the time. A photo was on the cover of Super 8 magazine. Later, I won a student award for the film, $200 from the Directors Guild of America, and $200, and yeah, it was great. And now UCLA has placed Diary of an African Nun in its archives, and they actually took that Super 8 film and blew it up to 35 millimeter. My second UCLA film was called Four Women. It's an experimental film based upon a song written and performed by Nina Simone. I used what I learned from Slavko Vorkapich at AFI. It was years before music videos came about and years after I first imagined a dancer coming out of a mesh-like womb when I was a cinematography student at the Studio Museum of Harlem. I had no real name for what I was doing, so I called the short dance film a choreo poem. Thanks to my studies with Slavko Vorkapich, Four Women won a gold medal for women in film at the Miami International Film Festival in 1977. Illusions, starring Lynette McKee, became my graduate thesis film. It was an original story that I'd written while I was at AFI about a Black woman passing for white while working inside of a Hollywood studio during World War II. When I learned that Signal Corps officers were assigned to motion picture studios during World War II to help out with the producing of wartime musicals and dramas, I was intrigued. And I wanted to make a film about that time period, about an incident that perhaps could happen inside of a Hollywood studio with Black women passing for white. So Illusions was made at UCLA, and it's won several awards, and it's been in distribution for many years, yeah. Since the making of Four Women in Illusions, I've been experimenting with ideas of the past and the present, experimenting with my eyes and with my heart, challenging my imagination as I relate to the reality within the frame with all of my senses, a process that is intellectual, sensual, technical, and I'm experimenting with the ways of combining the aesthetics of science, religion, art, social mores, and working with layers of social and historical energy. When I construct a film, my intention has always been to build a new world within a cinematic frame. And to do so, I ask myself questions like, what makes this story feel more authentic than others? What makes a film or this story tap into our collective memory? What makes it have resonance? After I graduated from UCLA, I met Alfre Woodard, and she asked me to direct a film she was about to executive produce called Funny Valentines. Funny Valentines is based upon a short story written by J. California Cooper and adapted to the screen by Amy Shaw Ferris. It tells the story of a woman who returns home to the South with her two daughters in tow after discovering her husband's infidelity. She reunites with her cousin, portrayed by Loretta Devine, and both women confront demons from the past and in the present. I was raised in the Baptist church, so this story of Funny Valentines meant a lot to me. I had to get it right about the powerful sisterhood of the church ushers, the way they dressed, their use of secret hand signals, and how they march. The canning of fresh fruits and vegetables also became central to the character work that I was using with Loretta Devine. So we did some wonderful things, colorful things with the canning of fruits and how it relates to her past and her present. My personal journey of discovery involves challenging conventional forms of representing African American women on the screen. After seeing Funny Valentines, the actor Angela Bassett asked me to direct her in the Rosa Parks story. Rosa Parks' story is written by Paris Quallers, and it's a biopic that tells the story of a civil rights activist from her days in a private school student to her public battle against racism. Rosa Parks was a secretary for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She defended local children who have been victimized by racism. And when she was arrested after refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger, Parks inspires the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott. The film stars Angela Bassett, Peter Francis James, Dexter King, and Miss Cecily Tyson. The production received multiple awards, including the Humanitas Award, the Christian Award, and 2 NAACP Image Awards. Angela Bassett was nominated for an Emmy, and I was nominated for a Directors Guild Award for late night film. Some of my other long-form narratives include Love Song, an interracial romantic musical with Monica Arnold, Christian Kane, Rachel True, and Essence Atkins. I also did a suspense thriller with Richard Jones and Allison Dean called Incognito, also with Phil Morris and Vanessa Williams. This brings me to my first theatrical feature film, Daughters of the Dust. Daughters of the Dust is a historical drama about the descendants of African captives who worked the coastal sea island, indigo, rice, and cotton plantations during the period of slavery. I mentioned earlier that I was able to cast this film through my contacts and association with members of the UCLA LA Rebellion, as well as other Black independent filmmakers working on the East Coast. The matriarchal lead, Nana Pazant, played by Coralie Day, worked with Haile Gerima on several of his films. The character of Yellow Mary is portrayed by Barbara O, who worked with me on Diary of an African Nun, as well as several films directed by Gerima. The character Hagar Pazant, played by K.C. Moore, was the female lead in Charles Burnett's film Killer of Sheep, and she was also in Billy Woodbury's film Bless Their Little Hearts. Eula Pazant, as acted out by Alva Rogers, worked with Spike Lee on several films, including School Days. The character of Mr. Sneed worked with Spike Lee also on She's Gotta Have It. And Trula, the character of Trula, her real name is Trula Hoosier, worked with Charles Lane on his award-winning film Sidewalk Stories. My co-producer and award-winning cinematographer on Daughters of the Dust was Arthur Jafer, along with our production designer, Carrie James Marshall. Our collaboration began in Los Angeles. We began intensive research on the visual rhetoric relating to the sea islands of the South. The story takes place in 1902 among the low-lying chain of sandy islands off the coast of South Carolina. At the time, the Sea Islands retained a predominantly African-American population that had developed a distinct culture and dialect known as Gullah. The Gullah Geechee, as they are known in Georgia, are an extraordinary group of African-Americans who live in small farming and fishing communities along coastal Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Ronald Days, author of Reminiscence of a Sea Island Heritage, was the dialect coach on Daughters of the Dust. And as he explained to us, Gullah denotes a way of life for a particular and special group of African Americans who have maintained the purest forms of African mores in this country. The Gullah dialect bonds its speaker with others of the African diaspora. About 90% of the vocabulary is English, but the grammatical and intonational features are largely West African.
Now everything they own are boxed up, packed up, and ready for head north. But when they come today for kiss these old withered up cheeks bye-bye, I'm gonna have something more than fairer waiting on them.
The story of Daughters of the Dust unfolds over the course of a family picnic, a Last Supper. Along the way, the film saturates us with impressionistic colors of African symbolism, Gullah rituals, cooking, dialect, and the sounds of field cries, all expressing the complex resonances of Gullah lifestyle. This story is narrated by two people, a great-grandmother and a character we come to know as the unborn child. Most characters in American narrative films are grounded in parameters dictated by the archetypical Greek gods and goddesses of classical Western literature. However, with this story, the crucial underlying references for the Pazant family are the deities of classical West African cosmologies. The film is structured in a way that an African griot would recall and recount a family's history. Rather than having a linear structure, the story of the Pazant family is recalled, recounted, and recollected in a manner that evokes the African oral tradition. Daughters focuses on the women of the Pazant family, who are the carriers of traditions and beliefs that are firmly linked to an African heritage. Filmmaker Oscar Micheaux's 1925 black and white silent film, Body and Soul, features a sequence with a jackleg preacher, played by Paul Robeson, teaching dry bones in the valley. I was a graduate student at UCLA when I first saw this film. My professor, Tashomi Gabriel, explained, in the Old Testament of the Bible, the book of Ezekiel has been a long favorite within the African American community. A search through the book of Ezekiel brought me to what would become the title of my first feature film. When I found a passage that begins, "O ye sons of the dust," I changed sons to daughters and titled my film Daughters of the Dust. Daughters of the Dust is a story of conflict and struggle between changing values in the early 1900s as a Sea Island family prepares to migrate, leaving their land and legacy for the promise of the North. At the heart of the film, there's a story about family coming to grips with both the past and the precarious present. The film opens with the Pezant family contemplating and celebrating their decision to leave Ebro Landing to embark upon a new life on the mainland. Yet Nana Pezant, the family matriarch, refuses to leave because of her deep reverence for the islands and the ancestors buried there, and the sense that the North will not be the land of milk and honey her progeny believe it to be. Years ago, when I first began outlining the story, this ongoing conflict between modernity and cultural tradition convinced me to go ahead and write a screenplay narrated by two individuals. If you know anything about motion picture screenplays, right, you know this was a no-no, having two people narrate the same story. This was the 1980s, and the foundation of Western storytelling still dictated a story can only be told by one individual, as they had to be alive, except for Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, produced in 1950. Actor William Holden is a dead man telling the story of his downfall. Conventional storytelling wisdom tossed aside, I was hearing dialogue from the oldest family member, Nana Pezant, and the character I began calling the unborn child. The child Eula Pezant is carrying inside of her womb. Nana Pezant, the 88-year-old matriarch of the Pezant family, fights to hold on to ancient religious beliefs at the dawn of a new century. Her great-granddaughter-in-law, Eula Pezant, raped by a landowner, is now pregnant. Eula's husband, Eli, believes that she is carrying the child of the rapist. Tormented by Eula's pregnancy, Eli cannot bear to talk to Eula, nor embrace her as his wife. Nana has been wrestling with the spirit world in an effort to keep her family from leaving their island. Now she must turn all of her attention to the storm raging inside of Eula's womb. Nana Pezant calls upon her ancestors to ensure that Eli is the father of his wife's child. The character of Hagar Pezant, she's an outsider who is married into this Gullah family. Hagar is looking forward to embracing the culture of the North. Hagar seeks to distance herself and her children from the remote Sea Islands and to leave behind the old folks like Nana Pezant and their hoodoo mess. Hagar tries to rule the Pezant family with her indomitable will.
And I'm tired of those old stories, watching her make those root potions. Who do she be talking? Washing up in the river with her clothes on, just like those old saltwater folks used to do. My children ain't gonna be like those old Africans, fresh off the boat. My God, I still remember.
Before the day is over, Hagar and Nana Pezant lock horns in a battle for the spiritual leadership of the family. At the family picnic, Eula seeks out Yellow Mary Pezant, a cousin who has returned home, quote-unquote, ruined after having worked as a wet nurse and prostitute in Cuba. On the eve of her family's departure from the island, Yellow Mary's determined to reclaim her place, her proper place in the Pezant family history. Eli and Eula are compelled by the will of Nana Pezant to seek a fellowship with their ancestors through spiritual possession. In his possessed state, Eli sees that the child Eula is carrying is his child. In the final moments of the film, Nana Pezant leads her family through a ritual of spirit regeneration. And in that ceremony, Nana creates a talisman. She calls it her hand, and it is to be carried by her family into the urban centers of the North.
Take me where you go, by your strength.
With a photographic style that is breathtaking, thanks to Arthur Jafer, our cinematographer, Daughters of the Dust is a sensuous drama that is full of the unexpected. A bit about the production design. The aesthetic idea for the production design for the look of Daughters of the Dust was economy of means and richness of expression. This concept has been the central principle in the lives of Black people throughout the diaspora. In Daughters, we sought to magnify that idea as a subtext to the story of the Pezant family. Our production designer was the fine artist Kerry James Marshall. His assistant was the fine artist Michael Kelly Williams. He worked as our art director. And they also brought on fine artist Martha Jackson Jarvis, who worked as a member of the art department. I believe this is the first time a film was made with fine artists heading the art department and creating the production design and the look of the film. We had two main objectives in the design of Daughters. First, to create a credible period environment in which the story could be told, then to infuse that environment with evidence and symbols of the African cultural practices retained by Black Sea Islanders to astonishing degrees. The primary site of retention display is the cemetery. Here, a direct cultural link with Congo-Angola grave decoration is undeniable. As in the Congo, the use of sculpture, pottery, cups, clocks, and other personal effects of the deceased on the graves are meant to honor the spirit in the earth, guide it to another world, and to prevent it from wandering or returning to haunt. One can imagine the density accumulated through generations of this practice, and that was what we were going for. Density. The world of the Pezants was designed to resonate with spiritual and aesthetic parallels to their African ancestors. For example, a pet turtle has the Kikongo symbol for the cosmos painted on its shell. The house is wallpapered with newspapers to protect it against evil spirits and witches. The children's rooms covered with accumulated drawings of generations of Pezant families. The walls reminding us of the cave drawings of Southern Africa. Outside of the family home, we see a bottle tree. It's there to protect against malevolent spirits. The bottle tree stands between the house and Eli's blacksmithing shed, which is ringed with barren trees, all painted a bright green, representing the West African deity of Ogun, the god of iron and the forge. Even Nana Pezant's chair, the matriarchal throne, is a structure of branches and twigs grafted onto an existing chair. Everything was designed to highlight continuity in the African tradition and the richness achieved with the economy of means. The unborn child is played by Kylan Warren. The unborn child is a storm raging inside of Eula's womb. The unborn child has 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in another. She is Ishu Alegra, guardian of the crossroads, and occupies space in the worlds of the sacred and the secular. 2 worlds. The unborn child personifies the duality of existence Du Bois speaks of in the African American experience in the United States. Double consciousness. When she becomes impatient with her parents, who are Eli and Eula, and when she becomes impatient with their dilemma about who has fathered her, the unborn child comes out of her mother's womb and walks among them as a 5-year-old to help out. Yellow Mary Pazant, played by Barbara O., represents the African American woman's loss of her self-esteem during slavery and Reconstruction. Yellow Mary is a prostitute who maintains a very independent lifestyle. Yellow Mary's name is derived from the name of the African goddess or deity called Yemonja, mother of the sea, mother of dreams, mother of secrets, and is often referred to as the veiled Isis. Yellow Mary's return home to Igbo Landing is depicted as a universal rite of transition. The symbolism of her entrance speaks directly to this character's personal dilemma. She's in an intermediate position. When we first see Yellow Mary, she's on a boat en route to Igbo Landing. Apart from the men rowing the boat, she appears isolated, alone. She's also wearing an elaborate veil that separates her from the outside world of prostitution, as well as walling herself off from her family. Later, we find out that Yellow Mary has brought someone else along with her on the boat to Igbo Landing. She's traveling with her girlfriend, Trula. Their plans are to stop by Igbo Landing to join the family's farewell picnic before continuing on to Nova Scotia, Trula's place of birth. And of course, we know Nova Scotia was one of the final destinations on the Underground Railroad. So Yellow Mary and Trula are taking a familiar route home. Viola Pazant, played by Cheryl Lynn Bruce, joins Yellow Mary on the same boat to Igbo Landing. Viola is Yellow Mary's cousin and a devoted Baptist who has been trained as a missionary. Viola reflects a syncretism of ancient African beliefs and Christianity. Viola's character attempts to escape her history and the trauma of living as a second-class citizen within her newfound religious beliefs. Baptism and the total immersion in water, crossing the River Jordan, all of those religious imageries of life after death being better is more acceptable to Viola than life on earth. She is an emotionally repressed character. Her present form of religious hysteria and ecstatic seizure replaces her forgotten physical communions with more ancient forms of spiritual possession. John Barnes created the original musical score for Daughters. He's a composer, producer, musician who has played with and collaborated with a variety of acclaimed artists, including Marvin Gaye, Quincy Jones, Herb Alpert, Whitney Houston, and Michael Jackson. For the soundtrack, Barnes assembled an impressive collection of musicians and styles to evoke the magic and mystery of the film's themes. Barnes spanned continents and musical genres by using a variety of instruments, including the synclavia, the Middle Eastern santur, African bata drums, and African talking drums. He successfully mixed synclavia-based percussion with authentic music from Africa, India, and the Middle East. One of the composer's aims was to depict various religions, including traditional West African worship rituals, Santeria, Islam, Catholicism, and Baptist beliefs through musical expression. Bonds drew from his own spiritual beliefs, which included a respect for astrology in composing music for Daughters of the Dust. For instance, he wrote the unborn child's theme in the key of B, which is the key of Libra, representing balance and justice. He says, because this character was coming into the world to impart justice, a healing upon her father and mother and her family. Similarly, he wrote Nana's theme, Nana Pazant's theme, in the key of A, representing the age of Aquarius, or the new age that was imminent for Nana's family. The film's closing theme is called Elegba theme, and it was written in the key of Taurus, D sharp or E flat. Barnes says that it is the key of the earth, the key ruled by love. The lyric Ego Elegba, show the way Elegba, he says, are about people moving forward after having been given love and dignity and now facing crossroads. In the African diaspora, John Barnes says, we all feel what each other does, whether we know the people, understand the language, or know the culture or not. We all feel each other. So the music of Daughters of the Dust has resonance, a transcendence that aims to make audiences feel the Pazant family's story even as they view it. A little bit about the cinematic style of Daughters of the Dust. Daughters of the Dust is comprised of tableaus structurally similar to African icons, Ethiopian magic scrolls, and Egyptian reliefs, or their New World antecedent, the work of James Van der Zee. Nana Pazant and her family are composed in tableau shots, so they appear to be suspended in time in a magical drama. The shots are designed to register in our limbic system as long-term memory. The color indigo, the most common source of color in West Africa, the color, the mood, the magic that it carries is integral to the story, structure, and the art direction. We use the color indigo as a visual metaphor to represent enslaved African captives. The hands of the older men and women, those who were born and worked in slavery, those who were enslaved, are stained blue from years of working with the indigo dye. The color indigo propels the viewer in two directions, the distant past and into the future. We show the process of indigo in the past and the process of dyeing the fabric, the making of the indigo cubes, the counting of the indigo cubes with the eeny, meeny, miny, mo, a familiar childhood chant that goes back to an African-based counting system, mispronounced but not forgotten.
Mina, 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 mina.
The shanties in which they live have indigo blue trim on the windows and doors, and we recognize this in contemporary Southern design, but it was originally done for protection. The unborn child arrives wearing an indigo blue ribbon in her hair, and Nana Pazant only wears the color indigo. Daughters is a post-slavery narrative about cultural memory, notions of home, and notions of belonging, the conflict between Black female identity, and to quote Dr. Patricia Lassane, it's about the cult of true womanhood. Our struggles, our hopes, our dreams, and our place within society are at the core of this film. Daughters is also about the rich cultural contributions of the Gullah to American art, cuisine, language, and history. 30 years ago, Daughters began a conversation. What does it mean to be Black and female inside the cinema of historical drama? Today, the conversations continue about intersections of race, gender, migrations, feminism, Christianity, and Pan-African religious expressions. The scholars who worked with me on this film included Dr. Margaret Washington Creel, Dr. Adrienne Leana Seawood, Worth Long, folklorist, and Oscar Sims. Inspired and nurtured by my association with the filmmakers in the graduate program at UCLA, our supporters also included Professor Robert Nakamura, Nancy Richardson, Amy Halpern, Patrick Morrude, Salinda Pereira, and Elliot Davis. Although they are often left out of the LA Rebellion roll call, they too were among the creatives who had the courage, who had the curiosity to explore the intersections of art, media, imagination, ritual, and politics. Thank you.